Mr. Fulcher from Idaho.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need to respond to a comment that a few moments ago from my friend from California that indicated that the United States somehow needs to follow China's lead on clean energy investment. And I just want to state for the record that if anyone believes that that's a model that we want to follow, pay China a visit. And I think they may change their mind. But on to my specific topic. This is going to be a question for Mr. Dauber, but it is in regard to geothermal energy. And in my state, Idaho, we've been a little bit of a pioneer on that front. There's the first district heating system in the country was in Boise, Idaho in 1892. We've got a very good resource there. It's carbon-free, it's base load, and we're a little bit familiar with it there. But it doesn't seem to get a lot of attention. And you made a comment, Mr. Dauber, earlier today that caught my ear that these, you need to be technology neutral, I think was the term you used when making decisions on these sources, and not some political idea and try to drive it with subsidies. And so with that comment, I wanted to just get your opinion. I've had a bill that I've run for several years called the Enhancing Geothermal Production on Federal Lands Act. It basically allows geothermal exploration and production on federal lands where there's already existing leases, oil and gas leases. It hasn't made it very far, but I wanted to just get your opinion. Does this satisfy the tech-neutral argument that you laid out before? What are the opportunities and challenges for geothermal in this country?
Congressman, I think expanding geothermal is absolutely something that we should be looking at, and not knowing every detail of the bill. I think facilitating lands that are already being used for energy production that have the geology already mapped out is going to drive down costs and increase the likelihood of finding the right formation, and further investment in driving down costs of geothermal equipment, right, and the thermal efficiency. It's great baseload generation, right? It's great baseload generation wherever it's at, and I would think that any place that it is available, we should be aggressively attacking that.
Great, thank you for that. And I need to pivot and just utilize my time as best as possible. I'm going to shift. I'm going to have a question for Mr. McNally here. It does go to the nuclear arena. And also in my state, we have the Idaho National Lab, and there's a lot of research there with a small modular reactors. And one of the arguments that we hear is that in addition to the efficiency of the energy production, there could also be some upside when it comes to grid security, specifically because we're threatened with sabotage, we're threatened with cyber attacks on our energy systems so much now. By having a energy source which you can isolate, for example, one reactor could potentially power the city of Boise, Idaho. By isolating that and staying off ultimate connectivity of an overall grid, that could help with cyber security or cyber attack threats. Your comments on that, is that true or is it false? Is it a benefit to be isolated off the grid, or is it a negative to do that?
Congressman Fulcher, on that question, that's outside my area of expertise. I would defer to my panel mate, Mr. Dauber, if you might have a view on that, but that is outside my area of expertise, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so I think nuclear power is absolutely supportive of grid security. First of all, it's really hard to penetrate a nuclear reactor in terms of security, and I think that has a lot of value. And then at the end of the day, the availability of it is unparalleled in this system.
But the isolation of staying off of a greater grid, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
The ability to separate in times of any challenges in the grid, including an attack, has great value.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the witnesses as well. Most of the good questions have been asked today. thank you all for being here. I represent the Permian Basin. It's been mentioned several times. I mean, this is literally the heartbeat of America's energy. It's the heartbeat of the shale revolution. I'm so proud of the men and women in the Permian Basin, Midland and Odessa, and throughout that part of the country that have innovated to a point where we have literally helped raise 1 billion people out of poverty throughout the world. We have literally lowered the cost of living for every American family to the tune of $2,500 per year. We have allowed this economy prior to January of 2021 to soar, to absolutely take off. And I'm trying to figure out right now the discussion about the climate crisis. Who is saying that this is the greatest threat we face with any sort of facts? And Mr. McNally, to your point, I want to see the analysis here. I want to see the data. You all have made some incredible points on that. I go back to some of the campaign promises that the president made, and I quote, "We are going to get rid of fossil fuels. There will be no more coal plants. We are going to phase out fossil fuels." Those were 3 quotes that he made. I got to hand it to him. He has done everything he possibly can with every tool to assault the 2 million Texans who are in this industry, who are like Dr. Cohen's family in Corpus Christi, who are doing the things cleaner, more efficiently, and better than anywhere else on the planet. He has assaulted this industry in a way that is directly attacking, and thank you, Ms. Jackson, for your testimony today, the most vulnerable in our country. I appreciate the regulatory and the permitting discussions. Mr. DeBar, if we continue with the policies that this administration is pushing, what's our country going to look like? What's our economy going to look like? What's our, we're expecting, 45% increase in demand over the next 30 years in electricity. What are we going to look like?
I think the key word that you just mentioned there, Congressman, is demand. So I think no matter how you approach this topic, as long as there's a demand for a product, then it has to be supplied from someplace. And take aside all the other debates, if we're still going to be needing petrochemicals to make this pen or to drive some cars, because they're not all electric vehicles, someone has to provide it. I think we can all agree on that from both sides. And so if it's not produced in Midland or Odessa, it's going to be produced in Caracas or outside Tehran. So that's it. That's it. So if we restrict it because of ESG, if we restrict it because of siting in this country, it will be produced overseas. It will emit more. It will be more environmentally hurtful for the world. It will be less jobs. It will be jobs in Tehran, not jobs in Odessa. I think it's relatively straightforward. So even if you have this debate on this topic, about demand, as long as the demand's there, for national security and the economy and the environment, it's better to be produced in America than it is in Russia or someplace else.
Yeah. Right now in San Angelo, Texas, my hometown, which is about 100 miles to the east of Midland, Odessa, it's 27 degrees, it's snowing, there's no wind at all, and the sun is not going to shine until Friday morning. And it'll be 27 degrees on Friday morning. I just looked at the weather forecast. I asked Mr. Kerry, the climate, I don't know what his official position is. I call him the climate czar, but I asked him if renewables provide baseload capacity, and I'll ask Dr. Cohen the same to you. We have a ton of wind energy. In fact, we're so proud of the wind energy we have, which is more than the state of California in my district. Do renewables, whether it's solar or wind or another form I'm not familiar with, provide baseload capacity for my family right now?
Renewables provides predictable electricity for your family and families all across the country.
And predictable is, I think, not always reliable.
Predictable means predictable. We know when the sun will shine. We know when the wind will blow. Smart grid operators can then provide, make the energy decisions they need to keep the lights on. I just happened to look at the Texas electricity map yesterday, and I noticed there is a lot of stranded electricity down in my part of the world. So if Texas could continue its leadership in building transmission, they actually would be able to free up some of that renewables that's blowing between Corpus Christi and San Antonio and get it up to other parts of the state.
It takes every form of energy, every amount of energy, and every bit of energy to service the demands. I could talk for another 10 minutes, but I don't have that much time.
Well,
I yield
maybe we
back.
can talk again another
But I won't
time.
let you.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Texas yields. The chair calls on the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Ms. Harshberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. You're tired, I'm tired, so I'm going to make a couple of comments, and then I will go to my question for Mr. DeBar. Ms. Jackson, I want you to know that I represent a rural district with 2 distressed counties. The average median income is $49,000, so I understand exactly. I get calls every day from constituents who I call my friends and family, by the way, and they tell me, if I pay my power bill, I'm going to have to make decisions about, do I buy groceries or do I buy my medication? So I just want you to know I totally understand, okay? And Mr. McNally, your statement about foreign and domestic actors beginning to attack our domestic energy infrastructure has never been more evident than with the Colonial Pipeline attack. I was on Homeland Security last Congress on the Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Subcommittee, and it was very frightening to hear that how that attack occurred and that it could happen again. And it hit me because I drive from my district in East Tennessee all the way to Washington, D.C. every weekend, and I had to stop at every gas station along the way to make sure that I had fuel just to come here and do my job. So that hit home, and you saying, I agree with you that Congress needs to be better prepared for more cybersecurity attacks, and we need to hold those bad actors accountable. That's a big deal. And Mr. DeBar, your comments about Russia having the largest overall HEU stockpile in the world, and your statement that the U.S. needs to work on our uranium enrichment capabilities is on point. And just so you know, I have nuclear fuel services in my district, and I've talked to many of those people there, and they absolutely understand the importance of this very issue, why we need to do enriched uranium. So with that said, and I'll continue to talk to them, so stay tuned. I agree that we absolutely need a higher base load of power because we've seen how fragile we are to these disruptions. And my question is this. Well, I'm from East Tennessee, the 1st District, and just before Christmas, East Tennesseans experienced rolling blackouts after the Tennessee Valley Authority was unable to meet those energy demands required to heat your homes during Storm Elliott. We know that natural gas facilities can come fully online in around 30 minutes, and our best option for ramping up energy production in a pinch. My question is this, how much additional investment in natural gas will we need to combat these unexpected increases in energy demand in the future?
So Congresswoman, TVA shut down baseload just like other places have.
Yeah, they did.
And that's the reason why I think you ran into those problems was that TVA was shutting down more plants. There are coal plants. You can kind of understand it, but you're going to need to replace them with something. You need to replace them with something that can be dispatched.
Yeah.
And natural gas is the obvious place to go, subject to some new nuclear power plants, which would be wonderful for East Tennessee.
Yeah.
And so the gas pipelines in general are not there to replace plants that used to be coal and rail and so on. So things are getting more unreliable in the whole TVA area, including in your region. That's the reality. And if gas pipelines are not built, you're going to run into that problem more and more as your great economy grows. I know East Tennessee well from being at DOE.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to have additional problems because your economic growth is so strong.
You know, the scary thing was that they didn't give notice, TVA didn't, to the emergency management services. The emergency broadcast systems went down because of the rolling blackouts. There was equipment damage. We're trying to track that too as we go along to see how long they were down, how much notice did they get, how much damage was done monetarily, because there's one industry that lost $3.5 million just from the shutdown and had to work through the weekend. And I have a question, and anybody can answer this in the amount of time I have left. You know, the American people tell us, come up here and work, do your job, and get results. But like so many other projects, whether it be energy production or highway improvements, they get stalled in the NEPA process. And I guess my question is, what would a rewrite of NEPA look like, and how that would allow for for us to build natural gas production so that environmentalists can't stall those projects into non-existence? Does anybody?
How about a bipartisan agreement to have legally enforceable deadlines for NEPA decisions? Clean energy, conventional energy, everything. Just say you got a certain amount of time, you got to get it done here, and you cut back on the litigation risk that we've heard today. And it's for all energies, all businesses, and so forth. I sense maybe there's bipartisan agreement behind that. And then we might want to think about critical national security infrastructure, where there you supersize it. You say, NEPA, you got to go even faster. But I would hope I'm sensing bipartisan agreement. We got to improve permitting for all energy here.
Fantastic. I guess.
Chairman, I just underscore that the Inflation Reduction Act had nearly $1 billion for agencies to fund their permitting work.
Thank you. The gentlewoman yields. Take us home. The gentlewoman from Iowa, Dr. Meeks.
Usually I don't need this, but Iowa's an energy state. And let me also say unequivocally that all of us, I think, bipartisan agree that we want a cleaner, healthier planet for our children and our grandchildren. But we also want to be able to have an economy that can compete in a global economic environment. Energy demand that I learned at COP26 and COP27, to my surprise, I thought energy demand was increasing. I was surprised to hear at COP26 and 27 that they thought energy demand is increasing. What I've yet seen from this administration is a way to transition with reducing emissions. So let me tell you a little bit about Iowa. Iowa has 50% of its energy from renewables. So that is wind, solar, biodiesel, ethanol, biomass, biochar, manure. We have this entire slew, and up until 2 years ago, we also had nuclear. We have an entire slew. 58% of our electricity is generated by wind. And we were told this year that we would potentially have rolling blackouts. Why? Because we're an energy exporter. So why should a state that generates massive amounts of renewable energy be subject to rolling blackouts? And it's because there's not enough energy production. On average, it takes 6.5 years to prevent transmission projects in this country. There are some examples of projects taking over 10 years, and they're still not fully transmitted or permitted. If we're serious about improving our grid security, modernizing our grid infrastructure, and diversifying our energy mix, we need permitting reform. Last Congress, I introduced the Stay Off My Line Act, which seeks to address some of these permitting challenges. And just very briefly, if you can, because I've got a couple of questions, what other steps can we take to improve our nation's permitting process when it comes to transmission? So if you would, Mr. Dabar, if you could take a swipe at that.
Yes, I keep coming back to the time clock. People don't have that bill, and you use the
Time clock.
Excuse me, your microphone, please.
The time clock of approvals under NEPA is basically preventing things from getting built. I think that's the biggest thing that could get fixed.
Thank you very much.
I would add that in Senator Manchin's permitting legislation, the language that dealt with transmission, I think, is a good place for this committee to look about going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Norcohen, and you had mentioned that earlier as well. Iowa is also the nation's largest fuel ethanol producer, and it accounts for about 1/4 of U.S. fuel ethanol production capacity. I've heard a lot from this administration and from people about electrifying our transportation sector. So I want to bring up a little different source of energy than what we've talked about throughout this 4 hours. I'm very supportive of ethanol-based aviation fuels or sustainable aviation fuels. According to the Department of Energy, replacing existing jet fuels with sustainable aviation fuels has been recognized as an effective strategy to help the aviation industry reduce greenhouse gas emissions, diversify fuel supply, and enhance energy security. The technology needed for SAF production already exists, including ethanol-to-jet conversion technologies. Compared to petroleum jet fuel, sustainable aviation fuel produced from today's corn ethanol offers a 15% lower carbon intensity, and as we've heard, can even be carbon negative. This is in part because the technology to produce ethanol from corn has improved. In fact, life cycle emissions of corn ethanol have decreased by roughly 1/4 in the past 15 years. What sort of R&D incentives and coordinated efforts would be needed to speed up the deployment of SAF in commercial aviation. Mr. McNally?
I hate to, I learned a long time ago working for President Bush, you either know the answer to the question or you say, I don't know and I could find out. So I'm going to pass to any other of my colleagues who might have views on SAF. It's not something in research and development.
I mean, we funded quite a bit of this at DOE, and as you mentioned, it's a big area of focus. The conversion of wind energy into sustainable aviation fuel and through a series of chemistry steps is completely doable. You can turn wind into aviation fuel. And so it takes a few steps of energy, and some efficiency needs to be improved. But Iowa's in an excellent position to help drive that innovation.
Thank you very much. And I would agree with our, Ames Laboratory, with what we're doing in the renewable space, and then also continued innovation in nuclear fusion, as we've just seen some landmark things occur, and then in hydrogen as well. I think we have a bright future if we focus on where we have agreement and that we all want a cleaner, healthier planet. Thank you.